Some tales of the frontier start with a gunshot or a storm, but this one begins with a knock. Soft at first, like the whisper of fate. And by the time it was over, that knock would lead to a reckoning so fierce, the prairies would remember it long after every man and horse was dust. A cowboy who wanted nothing but solitude would find himself caught between honor, love, and a secret powerful enough to spark a war. And what happened at his cabin door would change everything he thought he knew about enemies and himself. Amos Mercer hadn't seen another soul for near a decade, save for the occasional trader passing through the dry gullies of New Mexico territory. His world was his land, a humble cabin framed by weathered cottonwoods, a corral with one tired horse, and the endless silence of the high desert. Folks in the nearest town whispered about the ghost rancher who'd lost everything in a Comanche raid and chose exile over company. And Amos liked it that way. But on a night when the wind carried the scent of rain and trouble, that knock came. Not the heavy thud of a bounty hunter, nor the drunken pounding of a lost traveler. This was faint, hesitant, like the hand that made it was unsure it had the strength to do so at all. Amos froze. His hand hovered over the rifle resting by the door. Who in their right mind would come out here, miles from the nearest trail, under a sky splitting open with lightning? The knock came again. Then a voice, soft, trembling, speaking in Apache, but with enough pain in its tone that words didn't matter. He unbarred the door and opened it slow, his heart hammering like a drum. And there, leaning against the frame, was a young woman, no more than 20. Her long black hair clung to her face, matted with rain and blood. One arm clutched her side, dark red staining the torn doeskin. But it was her eyes that stopped Amos cold. Eyes full of fear, and something else. A silent plea. Amos knew in that instant his quiet life was over. The storm howled across the plains as if trying to warn Amos of what was coming. But he didn't heed it. How could he? The girl sagged against the doorway, her strength spent, her breath shallow. Without another thought, Amos caught her before she fell, his rough hands gentle against her trembling frame. She was light, far too light, as if the wind might carry her away if not for his hold. He kicked the door shut with his boot, bolting it against the storm. The fire inside crackled low, casting flickering shadows that danced across the log walls. Amos laid the girl on the only bed he had, grabbing a rag to press against the wound at her side. It wasn't gushing, but blood had seeped through her doeskin dress, mixing with the rainwater that dripped from her. "Easy now," Amos muttered, more to himself than her. His voice sounded strange after so many months of silence. The girl's eyelids fluttered, and she spoke, Apache again, soft and broken, like a prayer or apology. Amos didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear as day. She was asking for help, and heaven help him, he meant to give it. He stoked the fire, then fetched the water bucket from the corner. His hands, steady when breaking broncs or mending fences, shook as he cleaned the wound. It wasn't as bad as it looked. A clean cut, deep, but not fatal if she didn't take fever. What had done it? A blade? An arrow? Or worse, the cruelty of men. The storm outside lashed the cabin, and Amos knew that with the dawn would come questions. Hard ones. Who was she? Why had she come here? And what trouble followed in her wake? For on the frontier, blood always meant trouble, and Amos could feel it riding toward him already. All night the storm raged, and Amos kept his vigil by the girl's side. The fire's glow cast her face in soft light, and he could see now that beneath the grime and blood she was beautiful. Not in the way of painted portraits, but in that wild, untamed way of the desert itself. High cheekbones, dark lashes resting against weathered skin, lips pale from pain. She stirred once, murmuring in her native tongue, and Amos wished he understood. He'd picked up bits of Apache years back, enough for trade or to call a truce at the river crossings, but not enough for this. Not enough to know what haunted her dreams. Dawn broke at last, gray and heavy, as the storm moved east. The land outside lay washed clean, but the air carried a tension that set Amos's teeth on edge. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes sweeping the horizon. Nothing yet, but he felt it in his bones. As sure as thunder follows lightning, trouble would come. When he returned inside, the girl's eyes were open, watching him. She tried to sit up but winced, falling back with a gasp. Amos knelt beside her, offering water. She took it, her hand small and shaking as it met his. Then she spoke, one word in English, her voice no stronger than a breeze. Please. That was all it took. Amos Mercer, who'd sworn off the world and all its heartbreak, felt his resolve crack like dry timber. Whatever she'd fled, whoever hunted her, he'd stand in their path. But as he tended to her, Amos couldn't shake one thought. What force had driven an Apache girl, wounded and alone, to the door of a man she should have feared? And how long before that force arrived, demanding blood in return? The morning sun rose slow and sullen, casting long shadows across the prairie. Amos stepped onto the porch, boots creaking on the warped boards. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the heavy air. And with it came something else. A stillness too complete, too unnatural. Even the meadowlarks kept silent. His eyes scanned the horizon. There, to the south, a smudge of dust against the pale sky. Riders. Hard to tell how many, but they moved with purpose, kicking up the dry earth as they came. Amos felt his grip tighten on the rifle. He'd seen enough posses and war parties in his time to know when men rode with blood in their hearts. Inside, the girl stirred, her dark eyes watching him from the bed. She saw the tension in his stance, the set of his shoulders. And though she said no word, he knew she understood. She pushed herself up, biting down a cry of pain, and pointed to the back of the cabin, toward the low hills that rose beyond the corral. Amos shook his head. She wasn't in any shape to run. And truth be told, he wasn't the running kind. But she kept pointing, desperation flickering in her gaze. Whatever hunted her was closer than he'd reckoned, and more dangerous than he'd dared imagine. The dust cloud grew nearer. 3 riders now, maybe 4. Amos felt the weight of the decision settle on him like a yoke. He could hand her over, wash his hands of it. Or he could stand his ground, knowing full well what price that might bring. He took a breath, the kind a man takes when he's chosen his fate, and without another thought, he barred the cabin door and set his rifle by the window. Let them come. The riders came fast, their shapes sharpening as they neared the cabin. 4 men, hard-looking, their coats heavy with trail dust, rifles slung low. They weren't lawmen. Amos could tell that much. No badges glinted on their chests. No military stripes on their sleeves. These were bounty hunters, or worse, the kind of men who lived by the gun and died by it. Amos stayed behind the window, watching as they reined in their horses just beyond the porch. One of them, thick-set with a scar cutting across his cheek, called out, "Ho there! We mean no harm, just looking for someone." Amos didn't answer. His gaze flicked to the girl. She'd pushed herself up against the wall, pale but alert, listening. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the men outside like they were ghosts from her nightmares. The scarred man spoke again, voice oily with false friendliness. "We're tracking a runaway. Apache girl. Stole from her own people, they say. There's a reward. Gold if you've seen her." Amos felt the heat rise in his chest. A lie. He could see it plain. These men weren't working for any tribe. No Apache would send white guns after one of their own. No, these men hunted her for reasons darker than gold. He stepped to the door, rifle in hand but not raised. "Ain't seen anyone," he said, voice flat. The scarred man smiled, slow and mean. "Mind if we look around, friend?" Amos met his gaze through the crack in the door. "I mind." There it was. The moment the air seemed to hum with danger. The riders shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward rifle butts. Amos could almost hear the clockwork of violence ticking down. Inside, the girl's breathing quickened. She knew what came next. So did Amos. And still, he didn't back down. The man with the scar narrowed his eyes, his smile slipping. His horse stamped the dusty ground, sensing the tension. One of the other riders, younger, with a crooked hat and restless hands, leaned forward in his saddle. "Come now," he drawled. "We're just being neighborly. No need to make this difficult." Amos didn't budge. He stood tall in the doorway, rifle resting easy in his hands, but ready. "You want to be neighborly? You turn those horses and ride on," he said, his voice steady as the land itself. "Ain't nothing here for you." For a breath, the world seemed to hold still. The wind died down, and even the horses quieted. Then the scarred man barked a short, humorless laugh. "That so? Well, I reckon we'll see for ourselves." He nudged his horse forward, just a pace. It was a mistake. Before his mount's hoof hit the ground, Amos cocked the rifle. The sound was loud in the morning stillness, sharp as thunder. The horse danced sideways, nervous. The man pulled it up short, hand hovering near his pistol, eyes hard. "Don't," Amos warned. "You ain't drawing faster than I can fire." The scarred man hesitated, reading the truth in Amos's eyes. This wasn't a bluff. This was a man who'd made his peace with whatever came next. Inside, the girl whispered something in Apache, her voice trembling. Amos didn't know the words, but he heard the meaning clear as day. "Don't do this for me." But it was too late for that. The riders shifted again, weighing their odds, and Amos felt it in his gut. The next move would be theirs, and when it came, it would come fast. The scarred man's hand twitched toward his holster, but Amos didn't flinch. The rifle stayed level, aimed square at the man's chest. The silence between them stretched thin, tight as a wire about to snap. Then the younger rider lost his nerve. With a shout, he jerked his pistol free and spurred his horse forward, aiming to rush the porch. The scarred man cursed, too slow to stop him. Amos moved like a man who'd been waiting for just this. His rifle cracked, the report echoing across the empty land. The shot wasn't meant to kill. The bullet kicked up dirt at the horse's hooves, sending the animal rearing, eyes wide, foam at its bit. The rider tumbled from the saddle, landing hard, his gun skittering from his grasp. "Enough!" Amos roared, his voice carrying across the prairie like thunder. "Next one of you makes a move like that, I won't aim to miss." The scarred man pulled his horse back, his face a mask of fury. "You're a fool, Mercer. You think you can stand us off forever? We'll be back, and we won't be alone next time." "Maybe you will," Amos said, lowering the rifle just a hair. "But you won't be the first men to try me." For a moment it seemed the riders might press their luck. But then the scarred man spat into the dirt, gave a sharp whistle, and turned his mount. One by one, they wheeled their horses and rode off, the fallen rider scrambling after them on foot, limping as he went. Amos stood watching until they were nothing but dust on the horizon. His heart pounded, but his hands stayed steady. Inside, the girl had sunk back onto the bed, tears tracking through the grime on her cheeks. Tears of relief or dread, Amos couldn't tell. But he knew this much. Those men would return, and next time they'd bring more than 4. The prairie settled into silence once the riders were gone, but the peace felt thin, like a calm before the storm. Amos stood on the porch, watching the trail of dust disappear into the horizon. His knuckles were white on the rifle's stock. He'd faced down danger before, but this felt different. Those men weren't the kind to forget a slight. They'd be back, and they'd bring hell with them. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. The girl lay still, her face pale beneath the soot and blood. She met his gaze, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she broke the quiet, her voice ragged but clear. "More will come," she said in halting English. "Bad men. Many." Amos nodded. "I figured as much." Her eyes glistened and she pointed again toward the hills. "You go. Leave me. They want me, not you." But Amos shook his head. "Not my way, miss. I don't leave folks to the wolves." She swallowed hard, as if the weight of his choice hurt her more than the wound at her side. Then, surprising him, she reached beneath the folds of her dress and drew out a leather pouch. With shaking hands, she opened it, revealing something that made Amos's breath catch. A silver medallion etched with symbols he didn't know, but recognized all the same. Sacred. Important. "Why are they hunting you?" Amos asked, voice low. The girl hesitated, as if weighing the risk. Then she whispered, "Because of this, and what I know." Before Amos could ask more, a new sound drifted on the wind. Faint, but clear. Hoofbeats. More of them this time. Many more. And with it came the chilling thought. It wasn't just bounty hunters. This ran deeper and darker than he'd ever imagined. Amos moved to the window, heart thudding, scanning the horizon where the sound of hooves grew louder. Dust rose in the distance, more riders than before. A dozen at least, maybe more. But something was wrong. These men didn't ride like bounty hunters hungry for coin. Their formation was tight, their pace steady, disciplined, like soldiers. The girl's breath quickened as she listened, and when the first glint of metal caught the sun, she let out a soft cry. "Not them! No!" Amos turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Who, then? Who's coming?" Her eyes filled with dread. "Cavalry!" Amos froze. "Cavalry? What would the army want with you?" But the girl didn't answer right away. Instead, she clutched the silver medallion tighter, as if it might shield her from what came. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "Because I saw what I shouldn't. A meeting. Army men and those bounty hunters. Talking like friends. Trading gold for blood." The truth hit Amos like a hammer. These weren't just hired guns chasing a reward. This was bigger. A plot woven between outlaws and men sworn to uphold the law. A betrayal that could burn the territory to ash if it ever saw daylight. The riders drew closer, banners snapping in the breeze, sabers at their sides. But there was no honor in their charge. Amos saw it now. Cold calculation in their advance, no intent to parley. And in that moment he knew. This wasn't just about protecting a stranger. It was about standing against a lie that could poison the whole frontier. And the line had been drawn right at his cabin door. The cavalry unit reined in, about 100 yards from Amos's cabin, a cloud of dust swirling around their horses like ghosts. Their officer, a clean-shaven man with a stiff posture and eyes hard as flint, raised a hand to signal a halt. His voice boomed across the prairie. "Mercer, we know she's in there. Hand over the girl, and no harm will come to you." Amos didn't answer at first. He stood at the window, watching those soldiers like a man watching a storm roll in. The girl lay motionless, but her eyes never left him, wide, pleading, as if willing him to understand the danger. The officer called out again, his tone sharper now. "You're harboring a fugitive, a traitor to the United States. This is your final warning." Amos stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. "I don't know what tale you've spun, Captain," he called back, "but I know what I've seen. A wounded girl running for her life. And that's no crime in my book." A murmur ran through the ranks of cavalrymen. Some shifted in their saddles, uneasy. The captain's jaw clenched. "Don't be a fool. She's dangerous. She carries secrets that could cost good men their lives. And maybe it's those men who deserve to pay." Amos shot back. The captain's face darkened. He made a cutting gesture with his hand. "Take him. And burn the place if you have to." Amos's heart thudded in his chest. This was it. No more warnings. No more talk. The riders spurred forward, sabers flashing, rifles raised. And Amos Mercer, the loner who'd turned his back on the world, knew there was no turning back now. The cavalry charged, their hooves pounding the earth like thunder, sabers flashing, rifles ready. Amos didn't move from the porch, not at first. He stood as still as the old cottonwood behind him, watching the storm bear down. Then, with one smooth motion, he lifted his rifle to his shoulder. The first shot cracked through the morning air, sharp and true. It wasn't meant to kill. The bullet struck the ground just ahead of the lead rider's horse, sending the animal rearing, screaming its fear. The rider tumbled, and the line behind him faltered, confusion rippling through the ranks. "Stop!" Amos bellowed, his voice carrying over the roar of hooves. "Turn back, or I swear by all that's holy, I'll make this prairie your grave." The charge hesitated. Dust swirled, and horses danced nervously, sensing the tension. The captain pulled up hard, fury in his eyes. "Mercer, you're sealing your own fate." But Amos saw something else in the faces of the men behind him. Doubt. A few lowered their rifles. One young soldier glanced at his captain, then back at Amos, as if weighing which man to trust. Inside the cabin, the girl clutched the medallion, her lips moving in a silent prayer. The fire's light flickered across her face, casting her in gold and shadow. Then, from the distance, faint at first but growing stronger, came the unmistakable sound of more riders. But not cavalry, not bounty hunters. A different rhythm, the drumbeat of hooves that belonged to the land. Apache warriors. Amos's heart pounded. From both sides the storm was closing in, and he stood at its heart. The captain heard it too, the distant rumble of hooves that didn't belong to his command. His head snapped toward the horizon, eyes narrowing at the dark shapes cresting a low rise. Apache riders, a score or more, their silhouettes stark against the morning sun, their ponies swift and sure across the scrub. "Damn it all," the captain hissed. His men shifted, uneasy, their formation fraying at the edges. Some glanced at their leader, others at the gathering warriors. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Amos stood motionless on his porch, the rifle steady in his hands. His heart pounded, but his gaze was calm. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, Captain," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The Apache rode with purpose, but not in wild attack. They came fast, yes, but not like raiders. They rode like men with something to say, and every man with sense knew it was wise to listen. As they drew near, their leader raised a hand, calling out in English clear enough for all to hear. "Enough blood! This is not your land to burn, soldier." And that girl, she carries the truth. The captain's face went red. "This is U.S. territory. You have no right." But before he could finish, the Apache leader rode closer, close enough now for Amos to see the silver streaks in his braids, the wisdom in his dark eyes. "It is you who have no right. This was our land before your wars, before your gold. We come for the girl because she holds proof of your treachery." Amos's gaze shifted to the soldiers. The young ones looked shaken, their hands no longer sure on their reins. Even the captain's horse sidestepped nervously beneath him. The tension was a living thing now, thick and crackling like dry grass before a spark. And Amos knew, the next word, the next move, would decide if this land saw peace or fire. The captain's hand hovered near his pistol, his face a mask of fury and fear. His gaze darted between Amos, the girl inside, and the Apache riders fanned out across the prairie like shadows come to life. "You expect me to believe her word over mine?" he spat, voice trembling with rage. "You expect me to stand down because of stories whispered by savages and a fool of a rancher?" But the Apache chief wasn't rattled. His pony stood steady beneath him, and his voice rang clear. "Your lies end today, Captain. We have followed the trail of your deeds. The bribes, the stolen gold, the promises sold for blood. The girl saw it, and she carries proof." At this, the girl pushed herself upright in Amos's bed, her face pale but her eyes fierce. She drew from beneath her dress a folded scrap of parchment, dirty, torn at the edges, but intact. Amos saw the captain blanch at the sight of it. "She carries your own orders," the chief said, pointing at the paper. "Orders to pay the bounty hunters. Orders to burn our villages. Orders to frame us for crimes we did not commit." The cavalrymen shifted, eyes wide, glancing now at their captain, as if seeing him for the first time. The young one, the same who had hesitated during the charge, spoke up. "Sir, is it true?" The captain's hand twitched toward his pistol, but Amos was faster. His rifle lifted, aimed square at the man's chest. "Don't," Amos said, voice low and steady. "You're done, Captain. One more step, and your secrets'll die with you." The air held still. Even the horses seemed to wait. And on that quiet prairie, it became clear. The fire that had burned so long beneath the surface was about to break free. The captain's hand froze above his pistol, his breath ragged. Around him, his men sat stone still on their mounts, caught between duty and the dawning weight of betrayal. The Apache riders watched in silence, their faces unreadable, their ponies stamping the dry earth. Amos kept his rifle leveled, his finger light on the trigger. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "No more blood, Captain, no more lies. You can ride out of here, or you can fall where you sit. But one way or another, this ends now." For a heartbeat, the prairie held its breath. Then the young cavalryman edged his horse forward, eyes locked on his captain. His voice cracked the stillness like a whip. "Sir, if what they say's true, we can't follow you. We won't." Others nodded, some lowering their rifles, some casting their eyes away. The captain's face turned ashen. His grip trembled on the pistol's hilt, and for a moment Amos thought the man might draw anyway, might go down in a blaze of stubborn ruin. But then, as if the weight of it all finally crushed him, the captain let his hand fall to his side. His pistol stayed holstered, his shoulders slumped. "You're fools," he rasped. "Every one of you." "No, Captain," Amos said softly. "We've just had enough of men like you." The Apache chief urged his pony forward, stopping beside Amos's porch. His gaze met Amos's, a silent bond passing between them. Respect earned in the crucible of this moment. The captain sat broken atop his horse, his command crumbling, the lies he'd built his power upon scattered like dust in the wind. The prairie air felt lighter somehow, as if the land itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. The captain sat motionless, the truth of his defeat heavy on his shoulders. Around him his men shifted, unsure what to do now that their orders had turned to ash. The Apache chief dismounted, moving with the quiet grace of a man who'd seen too many battles and wished for no more. He stepped closer to the porch, eyes on the folded parchment in the girl's hand. "May I?" he asked, his voice low. The girl hesitated, then nodded, her fingers loosening their grip on the paper. The chief took it gently, unfolding it with care. His dark eyes scanned the words of betrayal, of secret payments, of orders written by the captain's own hand to set fire to peace. The chief looked up, gaze sweeping the assembled soldiers. "You see?" he said, voice carrying on the breeze. "Your captain's crimes are written here. His shame is his own. You need not carry it for him." The young soldier who had spoken earlier cleared his throat. "What will you do with him?" Amos lowered his rifle at last, his arms heavy from the long standoff. "That's not for me to say," he answered, looking to the chief. "Nor for any of us but the ones he wronged." The captain glared at them all, but the fire was gone from his eyes. The weight of his sins, exposed at last, seemed to press him down in the saddle. The Apache chief folded the paper again and slipped it into his coat. "We will take him," he said simply. "Not for revenge, for truth. He will answer to those he tried to destroy." And with that, the captain's fate was sealed. But the prairie still held its silence, because all present knew this wasn't the end of the reckoning. It was only the beginning. The captain slid from his saddle at the chief's quiet command, his boots hitting the earth with a thud that seemed louder than it ought to be. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. The man who'd ridden out so sure of his power now stood like a shadow of himself, his hands limp at his sides. Two Apache warriors stepped forward, taking his arms, not roughly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. The captain didn't resist. His gaze drifted to his men, perhaps hoping for rescue, but none came. The young cavalryman who'd spoken up earlier shifted uneasily, then looked away. The Apache chief nodded to Amos, respect in his eyes. "Your choice saved lives today," he said. "Not just hers, not just ours, yours too." Amos gave a small nod. Did what any man ought to. But they both knew that wasn't true. Many a man would have handed the girl over, saved his own skin, and let justice die quietly on the prairie. The girl stood at last, swaying a little, but upright. She met Amos's gaze, gratitude shining through her weariness. "You risked all for me," she said softly. Amos tipped his hat. Seemed the right thing. The cavalrymen watched in silence as the Apache began their slow ride east. The captain among them, his head bowed. The young soldier hesitated, then turned to Amos. "What'll happen now?" Amos glanced at the retreating figures. "They'll see justice done, their way, and maybe folks'll think twice before crossing 'em again." As the riders disappeared into the rising sun, the prairie felt wide and empty once more. But Amos knew, in his bones, that this patch of land would never feel quite the same again. The captain stood in the dust, defeated, his arms gripped by two Apache warriors, not harshly, but firmly enough that he knew escape was folly. His men sat silent in their saddles, shame heavy on their faces. The young soldier who'd spoken before cleared his throat. "We'll ride back," he said quietly. "Let the fort sort out the rest." Amos lowered his rifle at last, the weight of the moment settling on him. The Apache chief dismounted, his gaze steady on Amos. "You did more than save her today," the chief said. "You saved many from a war that didn't need to be." Amos gave a small nod. "Man ought to do what's right, that's all." The girl stood beside him now, watching the riders disappear across the prairie with their captive. The land felt wider, quieter. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft, the wind carrying her words. Amos glanced back at the cabin, at its weathered walls, its hollow windows, its ghosts. "Now?" He looked ahead, to the endless horizon. "Now we move on. This place ain't home anymore." Without another word, they started walking, side by side, leaving behind the cabin, the past, and the weight of all that had happened. The prairie stretched out before them, wild and waiting. And though the land kept its secrets, Amos knew. This day, they'd carved their own mark upon it, a mark no storm could ever wash away.